This presentation, titled The Internet of Things and the Management of Risk, comes to us from Craig D'Souza. Craig is the Managing Director of eRisk 360 and a governance, risk management, and compliance professional with training across ISO management system, assurance, and certification. His main areas of focus include providing integrated risk management consulting, auditing and training solutions across quality, environmental, and occupational health and safety risks. Craig has worked across a number of small, medium, and large private sector organizations. In addition, he's worked at both the state and national levels of the Australian government. And with that, take it away, Craig.
Thanks for the introduction, Michael. Appreciate that. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today, wherever you may be listening from. Welcome to this presentation on the Internet of Things and the Management of Risk. Just wanted to give you guys a brief overview of eRisk 360 and what we're all about. So we specialize in governance, risk management, and compliance. We're a technology agnostic business. We don't support or promote any particular solutions or technologies. We provide independent advice to assist risk, compliance, and audit professionals know what things to look out for, especially if you are working in high-risk industries such as health, where you may need to know exactly what's on your network. Hence, I've chosen this topic, Internet of Things, as it's a very broad concept. It also is widely applicable across a range of industries. And it's not just a catchphrase now, it's used quite commonly for applications where you can collect data, use things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, and have a number of applications that can not only manage risk, but also as an auditor and a compliance professional, you need to be aware of the kinds of risks and the kinds of issues that you need to be looking out for. So without further ado, I'll move on to the learning objectives and what we intend to cover. This presentation is not supposed to be too technical in nature. I'm not going to go into the detail of the complexities behind IoT and what it actually does or how it actually works. It's more providing you an overview. I'm going to be providing an overview of the systems and the processes that need to be considered as a result of these technology deployments. And it's aimed at helping risk and compliance and audit professionals understand about IoT, how it works, and the potential applications. My objective is to share as much knowledge and experience on the types of issues, the types of risks, and what to look out for when assessing IoT deployments. So I would like to really impart some knowledge and equip participants with the necessary skills to look at IoT and how it impacts on an organization in terms of its people, its systems, and its processes. Also, if there are any new systems and processes that might come into play as a result of IoT deployments. So for example, things like your data security, your privacy, undertaking various supplier evaluations, and monitoring and measuring your outcomes. So as you can see, I'm trying to align this presentation as much to some of the standards and the ISO standards and how they apply within the IoT context. I'll also talk about some case studies, in particular, some that are quite relevant to health and safety, as well as health that are quite recent. Brief outline. I'll be covering today what IoT is, why is it important, a bit about a background and the growth trajectory behind IoT, where is it going now and into the future. I'll also focus on the impact of IoT within organizations from a cultural transformation and digital transformation point of view. And as I mentioned previously, in my previous slide, I will go through and touch on the legal and regulatory landscape, as well as some case studies. So now, what is IoT? IoT defined. As I mentioned, it's not just a catchphrase, but it is a very encompassing term that can be used across things like your sensors, connected devices, digital components, and any component used to transmit data without the assistance of human intervention. Each IoT has a unique identifier, and it includes everyday devices, some of which you are already familiar, like your smartphones, your smart TVs, smart watches. And this is what is called the Internet of Things, also known as the Internet of Everything. So it not just applies to your current work, but also your everyday living at home through the use of connected devices. And these applications collect data in real time. And put simply, it is a way that these devices can sense information from the environment and talk to each other, providing meaningful information. So why is IoT important, and why bother learning about this? So as you can see in the diagram here, I've tried to describe some key characteristics of what are the important factors behind IoT and why you would consider finding out more about it. So companies have been embracing IoT for 5 main reasons. And then, to me, it's about when you can measure something, you can improve it, and you can manage it. So I won't pretend to have all the answers, but I hopefully will be able to shine a light on the skills and the systems and the processes that we as auditors and compliance professionals need to start thinking about as we move forward into this connected world. Ultimately, we need to think about IoT so we can assess the impacts and start to think about what impact IoT is having on organizations we audit and its stakeholders. And we need to have the necessary tools and frameworks so we can objectively answer the relevant questions around organizational objectives, targets, and outcomes. Some more background on IoT in terms of its current trend. As you can see, there's been around a 10% compound annual growth in the amount of connected devices. I've highlighted some research as well from Gartner, and they report that in 2025, there's going to be approximately 64 billion IoT devices globally. So you can see this trend has been going upwards, and it's only going to increase. Won't spend too much on this slide, but it really just gives you a little bit more background on the various other types of IoT applications. You've got consumer applications. We all know about voice assistants on our mobile phones. There's various commercial applications, things like your home video camera systems that give you notifications on your phone. We've got industrial applications, smart farming applications. We've got various infrastructure and military IoT applications as well. So there's a broad range of applications that fit in a broad range of industries, and IoT has been used across these industries for some time now. The purpose of this slide is just to give you a high-level overview of the types of IoT sensors that are currently on the market. The cost of these sensors is continually coming down, and the complexity, the accuracy, and the ability of these sensors to sense information from the environment is also increasing. So the number of sensors is also increasing as well, so you can get more and more information. Now, IoT is not just about sensors. There's a lot more technical detail behind IoT. For example, I'm not going into the detail around talking about things like the application layer, the infrastructure layers, the connectivity layers. I'm not really going into that technical detail, but I will focus on, as I mentioned before, the systems and the processes and what's important from a people perspective. So as an example, before deploying IoT solutions, we need to consider questions such as, what would the future of work look like? What are the people skills required and the training that is needed? What are the human factors, cultures, behaviors, and norms that will be required? So moving on to the legal and regulatory environment. I provided a list here. Again, I'm not going to go into the specific details of each of these particular standards or legislation. There are various checklists and tools that are available and are freely available that can enable you to understand some of these pieces of legislation a little bit better. But in summary, it is very much focused around the security and privacy of IoT devices. The Australian privacy principles set the overarching governance and framework for open and transparent management of personal information. Then you've got various security principles, which is more around the authentication and the authorization of information, things like data integrity, policy management, and authorization. Currently, the most applicable guideline or code of practice is currently in draft format. It's the IoT code of practice. It's in public consultation, and that consultation closed last month. It should be finalized later this month. So that's the IoT code of practice. So this is by no means an exhaustive list. So whilst this list can be fairly daunting and complex, having a basic management system such as quality or risk or information security will certainly assist in managing and maintaining the risks associated with IoT deployments. So assessing the risks of IoT deployments. So the slide shows a basic 4-step process that can be used to assess the risks associated with IoT deployments. You should also think about data capture, storage, and processing requirements, and the various steps involved at each of the different IoT layers. For example, the sensor layer, the infrastructure layer, the connectivity layer, and the application layer. So in regards to this, start thinking about the data inputs, the data outputs. Think about how a process-based auditing approach can be used to assess IoT deployments at each of those different layers. So to give you one example, we've got the sensors that I mentioned previously. You've got various temperature sensors, humidity sensors, all those types of sensors which collect information. You need to think about how that information is collected, where it's stored, how that information is communicated, the privacy behind that information, what systems, what processes are important to collecting and storing that information, and then assessing the risks of each of those particular stages. So I talked about the sensor layer, then there's the data layer. And in the data layer, you've got data being converted from an analog format to a digital format. Then you've got the data conversion and processing layer, where you've got various standardization of data. You've got data being passed into the cloud, and then you've got the data analysis layer. So through this data analysis layer, that's where all the processing, the statistics, and the machine learning and various other algorithms calculate certain information and characteristics. So again, with this particular layer, there needs to be an assessment of what are the particular kind of risks, where things can go wrong, and how things can be improved. So you need to apply that typical traditional ISO standard management system approach to assess the risks at each of these various layers. So moving forward, I'm going to touch on some case studies. I've deliberately kept the case studies fairly general. I haven't gone into any specific detail of the companies introducing these solutions or the specific technologies being used, as this varies on a case-by-case basis. It also depends on the nature of the problem required to be solved, as well as a number of site-specific factors. And obviously cost comes into the equation as well. So the purpose of talking about these case studies is just to demonstrate the power of IoT in managing problems, as well as the systems and processes and the risks that compliance professionals must consider. So I've tried to handle it as a two-pronged approach, where there are a lot of benefits associated with IoT in managing risks and improving health and safety, but also as compliance and risk and audit professionals, we need to think about these deployments and the risks before we actually implement them within our organizations. So the first particular case study I've got here is an IoT application and how it's helped improve health and safety compliance within an organization. And this could apply to any business that requires minimum personal protective equipment. So for example, construction workers working on a building and construction site. There could be various cultural and human factors that influence staff from complying with their minimum PPE requirements. For whatever reason, you're always going to get people that refuse to wear their minimum personal protective equipment. So one of the benefits here of introducing a technology solution is that you can ensure workers can be provided with tools as well as checklists, but also they can be provided with a tagging system. What we're talking about here is they have a particular tagging system and their particular supervisor is given a warning before the construction worker enters the site, or they have to tap on or tap off their particular PPE equipment before they start a particular piece of equipment, or before they put their hard hat or glasses on. There has to be a specific requirement that needs to be followed. And this is all monitored through things such as RFID tags that use radio frequency to detect whether or not a particular piece of equipment is worn correctly. So this is one example. So moving forward, how can IoT help improve health and safety? In the example before, what you've got is a particular technology solution that's been deployed for workers to make sure that they check on when wearing a particular personal protective equipment. So an example is this particular piece of information will pull data automatically into the health and safety software, track various employees using the equipment. What I've done here is also I've highlighted in red particular areas of a management system that you could look at when reviewing such technology deployments. So in red, I've highlighted areas within the ISO management system. It could be a quality management system, it could be a risk management system, or however way you identify your risks, or you want to update your particular policies and procedures. I've identified the relevant sections that would be applicable. So for the second dot point, you ensure that only trained and authorized persons are using the equipment. In this regard, you'd have an induction procedure. You'd sync up your employees' RFID tags with records of completed safety training. You'd have a training and record keeping procedure, an ability to automatically send emails and notification to employees when they haven't completed their training. Again, this would relate to training and reporting process, as well as any non-conformance reporting procedures if safety managers are not abiding by the particular process for using that particular personal protective equipment. So I've highlighted some key processes, as I mentioned. The risk and compliance professionals here play an important role in organizations as they need to implement appropriate controls to manage these IoT risks. Further to this, the standard type of controls applying to most IoT deployments revolve around areas such as privacy and security standards, data collection, storage and processing standards, and things like supplier benchmarking. So as an organization, if you're looking to procure equipment that has things like sensors embedded into the personal protective equipment, you want to be making sure that you evaluate your suppliers, they have sufficient stock levels, they're reliable, and of course they've gone through the appropriate quality and risk management processes as a sensor manufacturer. They've been endorsed. So these are various things you need to be looking at prior to procuring any IoT solution in your personal protective equipment. So that's one example of a health and safety solution that can be used. A number of companies in the construction phase now have been involved in trialing and deploying such solutions to staff. In terms of the success and the objectives of these, it's still quite early, but as part of a risk and compliance professional, it's really important that we look at the objective data before and the objective data after, and see the kinds of compliance rates that you're achieving. Look at things like the trends, health and safety trends, look at various indicators around health and safety, and really start looking at the trend data and seeing if these IoT systems are actually helping compliance and improving health and safety, because that's the ultimate objective that you're really trying to achieve. So the next example I've got here is for a IoT device being used to monitor physical distancing. One recent example is in the current environment with COVID-19, and I'm just going to briefly talk about the range of options available here. Again, you've got a key problem here where you've got people entering a busy location. It could be a retail outlet or a construction site. You really want to limit the exposure, and you want to ensure that people maintain the appropriate physical distancing. So the opportunity here is to introduce an IoT solution using a range of technologies that can detect things such as temperature. They can also detect movement. They can detect the separation between people and the distance between people. And these technologies are getting more accurate. Not only are they getting more accurate, but the data and the information that they collect and sense from the environment can be analyzed to provide meaningful results. Another example here is the Australian government's COVID Safe app, which is available on the Apple and Android device store. This particular app uses Bluetooth technology and is a community way to stop the spread of COVID-19, providing notifications directly to people who have come into contact with anyone with the virus. So again, this particular app using Bluetooth is a good example of a type of IoT technology. So far, they've had around 3 million downloads of the COVID Safe app at the time this presentation was produced. And as well, there's only that one, but there's also other applications now that can be used to track location and movement using things like GPS in your phone and geolocation data stored in the various smart apps of your phone. You can also track people, the movement, where they've been, and distancing as well. The cameras, the photos that I've got on the right there are cameras, 3D cameras and LiDAR cameras as well, that are very accurate way, less than 4 centimeter accuracy in terms of detecting the distance between people. So there's a range of hardware and software tools that can be brought together to really monitor and track this information. So what I've got here is, again, as I mentioned, I've highlighted in red the areas that need to be looked at from a system a management system point of view when implementing these solutions, because IoT is not just about technology. It's not just about deploying technology. It's more than that. It's about how it impacts people, how it impacts systems, how it impacts processes. So in the examples that we're talking about before, about an IoT solution which is used to help manage COVID-19, organizations need to, when monitoring body temperature and using various technologies like infrared sensors, there's got to be some consent forms. You need to look at your calibration records, and you need to look at your legal and regulatory requirements for actually collecting this information. So it comes back down to your standards and your codes of practices, making sure you're aligned with that and you comply with what's required in your local jurisdiction. Again, with visual sensors, the various cameras that I was talking about, combined with various machine learning and computer vision technologies, you need to look at things like your calibration records. You need to look at the different layers in terms of how data is collected, and within each of those different layers, look at the things like if there's any inaccuracies in terms of how the data is collected, in terms of the storage and the processing of the data. You need to start thinking about where are the sources of risks and how you can start managing things better. In terms of the geolocation and capability in smartphones to alert employees traveling in a particular location, again, this can potentially be intrusive information. It can potentially breach privacy. So you need to ensure that if you are looking at tracking your staff, or anyone for that matter, you have appropriate consent forms in place and you've documented your legal requirements into a legal register and you're managing these and maintaining these appropriately. As I mentioned, organizations need to comply with the local regulations before deciding what solution is feasible. So I'll touch on some really brief deployments in the following slides. An example here of healthcare. There are a couple of examples here of smart wearables. One that I'm personally using at the moment is the Fitbit watch, which measures things like your sleep and your heart rate and gives you various sort of advanced information. The second dot point is an advanced diagnostic tool used essentially to help people that are sick and help them with more personalized medicine, providing things like reminders around taking medication. And the third dot point, new IoT-enabled devices dispense pre-filled cups of scheduled medications for patients who find it difficult to maintain their medication and dosages. Another one is robots used in hospitals interacting with patients with COVID-19. So again, there's been some various trials where you've got now fully automated robots that are basically connecting with patients and reducing exposure to medical and nursing staff. In the manufacturing, engineering, and construction sector, there are lots of examples here. You've got sensors embedded in flooring in manufacturing and assembly plants to monitor the friction and characteristics, as well as the moisture content in the floors that can help prevent slips, trips, and falls. And there are a few more examples as well. We talked about the smart hard hat for workers that monitor things like body temperature, heart rate, ambient temperature, and humidity. And a final one there is a heavy construction equipment deploying IoT applications to capture information on location and the condition of its equipment. So again, when implementing or looking at any of these solutions, you need to think about the systems and the processes and the people and how it impacts these various elements within an organization. So in terms of the limitations of IoT deployments, whilst there are a lot of solution providers that want to sell their solutions, there are a lot of benefits. But as a risk and compliance professional, it's important to think about the systems and processes and the people and how you're going to minimize those particular risks and gain the full benefit of IoT. So there's obviously budget limitations. There's access to sensor technology. As I mentioned, the sensor and the price of sensors are rapidly coming down. And also the ability to execute, the ability to implement these systems within your organization. So some concluding remarks. The Internet of Things has traditionally been fraught with danger, relating mainly to issues around security and privacy. However, with the implementation of appropriate systems, safeguards, and security protocols, the Internet of Things can be used to mitigate some of these concerns. Hopefully this presentation highlighted IoT applications that are relevant for yourselves and your business. One example is IoT used to monitor and manage physical and social distancing. As I mentioned, it's a very relevant example. So IoT does offer some really exciting potential with some very real benefits for the risk and compliance professional and the community at large. There will be benefits that will be achieved through this with appropriate risk and controls and measures put in place. So I hope you found this presentation informative, and thanks for listening. If you have further information, there are my contact details. Please feel free to reach out. Thanks for your time.
And thank you, Craig D'Souza, for that look at risk and the Internet of Things. And that concludes this presentation.